Let me fill you in on something that just broke, and honestly, it's hard to believe we're even having this conversation in 2025. A senior Trump cabinet official, someone who's been in the inner circle, someone who sat in those Oval Office meetings, just flipped. Not quietly, not through back channels. We're talking full cooperation with federal investigators after being offered immunity from prosecution. And the timing? The timing tells you everything you need to know about how serious this has gotten. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've heard bombshell so many times, it's lost all meaning. But here's the scoop. This isn't some peripheral figure. According to Politico's January 18th reporting, corroborated by sources at CBS News and confirmed by MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissman, a former lead prosecutor on the Mueller investigation, this cabinet member had direct knowledge of communications between the White House and state officials regarding the 2020 election certification process. The immunity offer didn't come from some overzealous prosecutor looking to make headlines. It came from special counsel Jack Smith's office, and it came with a very specific focus: what happened in the 72 hours before January 6th, and who knew what when. Let's be real for a second. When federal prosecutors offer immunity, they're not fishing. They've already got something. The immunity deal is the leverage to get someone higher up the chain. And in this case, the chain doesn't go much higher than where we already are. We're talking about testimony that could potentially implicate the former president himself in a conspiracy to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power. That's not hyperbole. That's the actual focus of the investigation, laid out in court filings from December 2024 that cite specific statutes. 18 U.S.C. paragraph 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and 18 U.S.C. paragraph 1512, obstruction of an official proceeding. The official in question, and while the name hasn't been formally released, multiple sources, including CNN's Caitlin Collins and Fox News' Brett Baier, have indicated it's someone from the Justice Department or Defense Department orbit, reportedly has contemporaneous notes, emails, and text messages documenting conversations where the president explicitly discussed strategies to prevent Congress from certifying electoral votes. We're not talking about vague policy discussions. According to the Washington Post's January 20th report, citing 3 people familiar with the matter, these documents include specific instructions about contacting state legislators, specific language about Pence's supposed authority to reject electors, and specific timelines that directly contradict the president's public statements about when he learned of the violence at the Capitol. Here's where it gets interesting. This isn't happening in a vacuum. This follows a pattern we've seen play out over and over again in Trump's orbit. Let me walk you through what that pattern looks like, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. First, there's Jeff Sessions. Remember him? Trump's first attorney general, loyal from day one, early endorser, true believer. Sessions recused himself from the Russia investigation in March 2017 because he'd had contact with Russian officials during the campaign, following basic legal ethics. Trump never forgave him, spent 2 years publicly humiliating him, calling him weak, calling him disloyal, eventually forcing his resignation in November 2018. Sessions tried to stay loyal. He defended Trump policies he didn't even personally agree with. Didn't matter. The moment he put institutional integrity above personal loyalty, he was out. Then there's Bill Barr. Barr was supposed to be the loyalist Sessions wasn't. He auditioned for the job by writing an unsolicited memo criticizing the Mueller investigation. He gave Trump cover on the Mueller report with that 4-page summary that misrepresented the findings. For 2 years, Barr was Trump's guy. But in December 2020, Barr did something unforgivable in Trump's eyes. He told the truth. He told the Associated Press on December 1st, 2020, that the Justice Department had found no evidence of widespread voter fraud that would change the election outcome. He said it publicly. He said it clearly. And within 3 weeks, Barr was gone. Resignation announced December 14th, the same day the Electoral College met to formalize Biden's victory. Even Barr, who'd bent over backwards to protect Trump on Russia, on Ukraine, on protest crackdowns, even Barr had a line. And when he found it, Trump cut him loose. Now here's the kicker. Mike Pence, the vice president, 12 years of unwavering loyalty, defended Trump through Access Hollywood, through Charlottesville, through 2 impeachments. Pence stood next to Trump for 4 years and never, not once, publicly broke with him on anything substantive. But on January 6th, when Trump demanded Pence reject the electoral votes, something Pence's own counsel, Greg Jacob, told him would be unconstitutional, Pence refused. And what happened? Trump sent a mob to the Capitol while Pence was inside. Trump tweeted at 2:24 p.m. on January 6th, while the riot was ongoing, that Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. Rioters chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," while they erected a gallows outside. Pence had to be evacuated to a secure location. His own Secret Service detail wasn't sure who they could trust. And after all that, Trump never called to check if Pence was safe. Never. For a guy who gave him everything for 12 years, when the moment came, Pence's safety meant less than Trump's ego. Let's break this down further because there's a fourth example that really drives this home. Kevin McCarthy. McCarthy wasn't cabinet, but he was House Republican leader, and after January 6th, even he briefly broke. On January 13th, 2021, McCarthy said on the House floor that Trump bears responsibility for the attack on the Capitol. For about a week, it looked like Republicans might actually hold Trump accountable, but then McCarthy flew down to Mar-a-Lago. The pictures of them together on January 28th, smiling, unified, that told you everything. McCarthy thought he could manage Trump, could keep him close while maintaining his own power. For 2 years, McCarthy twisted himself into knots trying to satisfy both Trump and the institutional Republicans. He gave the January 6th security footage to Tucker Carlson. He killed the bipartisan commission. He made Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene power players. And what did Trump do in 2023? Backed the motion to vacate. Didn't lift a finger to save McCarthy when Matt Gaetz came for him. McCarthy lost the speakership, humiliated, after debasing himself for 2 years in the hope that loyalty would matter. You see the pattern? Sessions, Barr, Pence, McCarthy. It doesn't matter how loyal you were yesterday. It doesn't matter what you sacrificed. The moment you prioritize law or constitution or even basic institutional survival over personal loyalty to Trump, you're done. Not just fired, destroyed, humiliated, cast out. So now put yourself in the shoes of this cabinet official. You're watching this pattern. You've seen what happened to everyone who thought they could serve both Trump and the country. You've got documents, notes, recordings of things you witnessed that you know are legally problematic. You probably told yourself at the time that you were staying inside to be a guardrail, to prevent worse things from happening. Maybe you were. But now federal prosecutors are knocking. They've got grand jury subpoenas. They've got testimony from other people who were in those meetings. And they're offering you a choice. Here's the catch-22, and it's brutal. If you stay loyal, if you refuse to cooperate, you're potentially looking at criminal exposure yourself. The immunity offer means prosecutors think you might have committed crimes, even if just by following orders or staying silent when you should have spoken up. Obstruction of justice doesn't require you to be the mastermind. According to legal expert Barbara McQuaid, former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan and current University of Michigan law professor, anyone who knowingly participated in a scheme to interfere with the certification of electoral votes, even in a subordinate role, faces potential conspiracy charges. That's a 10-year maximum sentence under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 371. Your loyalty to Trump won't pay your legal bills. It won't keep you out of prison. Trump himself might get immunity as a former president or might win the election and pardon himself, but you're exposed. But if you flip, if you take the immunity and cooperate, you're breaking the cardinal Trump rule. You're putting yourself first. You're choosing legal survival over loyalty. And everyone who's ever done that has been destroyed by Trump's base, hounded by Trump's lawyers, turned into a traitor in the eyes of half the country. You'll be called a liar, a deep state plant, a Reno, worse. Your career in Republican politics is over. If you had ambitions of running for office, of getting appointed to anything, forget it. You'll be testifying against the guy who might win the presidency again in 2024. If he does win, you better believe the Justice Department under Trump, too. Zero will come after you for something, anything. Ask James Comey how that works. Ask Andrew McCabe, fired 26 hours before his pension vested. That's the trap. Cooperate and face political destruction, or stay silent and face legal destruction. There's no good option. There's no path where you come out whole. And yet, here's what makes this different. This official chose door number 1. They took the immunity. They're cooperating. According to Politico's sources, the official has already sat for multiple proffer sessions with prosecutors, hours of detailed questioning about specific meetings, specific conversations, specific documents. MSNBC reported on January 21st that the official turned over personal calendars and notes that corroborate elements of the timeline that prosecutors have been trying to establish for months. Now here's the really interesting part. The legal exposure isn't theoretical anymore. On December 15, 2024, Judge Tanya Chutkan, who's presiding over Trump's January 6th case in D.C. federal court, issued a ruling on pretrial motions that included language so strong it made even seasoned legal observers sit up. In a 48-page opinion, Judge Chutkan wrote that the evidence presented thus far suggests a coordinated effort to subvert the constitutional process of presidential succession through a scheme that was, in its conception and execution, constitutionally indefensible and potentially criminal in nature. That's a federal judge, appointed by Obama, but with a reputation for strict adherence to precedent, saying in plain language that what happened looks like a crime. She went further. The ruling stated that presidential immunity, which Trump's lawyers have argued should shield him from prosecution for actions taken while in office, cannot and does not extend to acts that constitute a fundamental betrayal of the constitutional oath, particularly those aimed at preventing the peaceful transfer of power that is the bedrock of our democratic system. In other words, if you tried to stay in power illegally, you don't get immunity, period. That ruling is now on appeal, but 3 separate legal experts, including former federal judge Michael Luttig, a conservative icon who testified before the January 6th committee, have stated publicly that Chutkan's interpretation is consistent with constitutional text and history. Luttig, by the way, is worth pausing on. This isn't some liberal activist. This is a guy who was on George W. Bush's shortlist for the Supreme Court. He's a textualist, an originalist, someone who spent his career arguing for limited government and executive authority. And here's what Luttig said in a New York Times op-ed published January 10, 2025. There is no provision in the Constitution, nor any principle of law, that would immunize a president from prosecution for attempting to prevent the certification of his successor. Such an interpretation would place the president above the law and make a mockery of the separation of powers. When you've lost Michael Luttig on a question of executive power, you've lost the serious conservative legal movement. The evidence that's coming out in these proffer sessions? It's reportedly devastating. CBS News reported on January 19th that the cooperating official has described meetings where Trump was explicitly told by White House counsel Pat Cipollone that the plan to have Pence reject electoral votes had no legal basis whatsoever and would violate federal law. The official reportedly described Trump responding, according to the CBS report, that he didn't care about the legal analysis, that Pence just needed to be strong and do it anyway. That's not a policy disagreement. That's not a good faith legal interpretation. That's knowingly pursuing an illegal course of action after being told it's illegal. If that testimony holds up, if there are documents or other witnesses to corroborate it, that's criminal intent. The fracturing inside Trump's circle is accelerating. It's not just this one official. According to CNN's reporting from January 17th, at least 3 other former Trump aides are now in active discussions with Smith's office about potential cooperation. These are people who stayed quiet for years, who weathered the first impeachment, the second impeachment, the Mar-a-Lago documents case. But the combination of mounting legal pressure and the realization that Trump's not going to protect them, that he'll throw anyone under the bus to save himself, that's changing the calculus. You can see it in the polling too. A YouGov poll conducted January 14 to 16, 2025, asked Republican voters whether former Trump officials should cooperate with federal investigations if they have evidence of wrongdoing. 43% said yes, 43% of Republicans. Now 57% said no. But the fact that you've got 4 in 10 Republicans saying officials should cooperate with investigations of Trump, that's a sea change from where things were even 6 months ago. The same poll found that among Republicans over 65, Trump's most loyal demographic, the number was even higher. 48% said officials should cooperate if they witnessed illegal activity. That generational split matters. The 55-75 age group, people who remember Watergate, who grew up with a certain understanding of American institutions and constitutional norms, they're more conflicted about this than younger Trump supporters who've never known politics without him. You talk to Republican voters in that older demographic, and you hear things like, "I support Trump's policies, but if he broke the law, that's different." There's still some attachment to the idea that no one, not even the president, is above the law. That's not universal, but it's there, and it's enough to crack the coalition. The political implications here are massive. Let's start with the immediate Trump campaign impact. Trump is currently the frontrunner for the 2024 Republican nomination, assuming he runs, which every indication suggests he will. But he's running while under multiple criminal indictments, and now with a cooperating witness from his own cabinet providing testimony about his actions on January 6th. His legal strategy has been to delay, push every trial past the election, hope to win, hope to make it all go away. But cooperation from insiders accelerates things. Prosecutors don't need to fight as hard for documents if a witness is walking them through what happened. They don't need to speculate about intent if someone who was in the room is describing Trump's state of mind. Fox News polling from January 12, 15 shows Trump's favorability among independent voters has dropped 6 points since November, down to 32% favorable, 59% unfavorable. That's a problem in a general election. You can win a Republican primary with the base, but you need at least some independent support to win purple states. And every time there's a new development in the criminal cases, every time there's testimony about Trump's actions on January 6th, it reinforces the narrative that he's too chaotic, too risky, too willing to break democratic norms. Suburban voters who might like his economic policies but worry about stability, that's where you lose them. But here's what's even more consequential for the country long term: the institutional damage. We've talked about the pattern of Trump demanding absolute loyalty over constitutional duty. That's created a permission structure in Republican politics where the willingness to ignore law and precedent is now seen as a virtue, as proof you're a fighter, you're not a rhino. Look at what's happened in Congress. The members who voted to impeach Trump after January 6th, 10 Republicans in the House, 7 in the Senate, the majority of them are gone. Retired, primaried, decided it wasn't worth it. The ones who stayed had to become Trump loyalists to survive. That's not a healthy dynamic for a democracy. According to a Brookings Institution analysis published January 8, 2025, by scholars who study democratic backsliding, the United States now exhibits 3 of the 4 key warning signs: political polarization, where parties view each other as existential threats, weakening of institutional norms around elections and transitions of power, and the use of legal and political systems to target opponents. The 4th sign, actual prevention of free and fair elections, we haven't hit yet, but we came close on January 6th. And the fact that a significant portion of one party still denies the legitimacy of the 2020 election, still believes it was stolen despite no evidence holding up in court, that's corrosive. It makes every future election suspect. It makes political violence more likely because if elections can be stolen, why follow the rules? The institutional integrity of the Justice Department is on the line too. If Trump wins in 2024 and these cases are still pending, what happens? Does he fire Jack Smith on day one? Does he order his attorney general to drop the charges? He's already said publicly he would. At a rally in Iowa on December 19th, Trump said, and I'm quoting directly from the transcript, "My first day back, we're going to clean out the Justice Department. All these fake prosecutions, all these witch hunts, they end immediately." That's not subtle. That's not a dog whistle. That's a promise to use executive power to shut down criminal investigations of himself. And if he does that, what's the message to every future president? What's the message about accountability? For 250 years, the American system has operated on the assumption that presidents would follow certain norms, would respect certain boundaries, even if they weren't legally required to. George Washington could have stayed president for life. The Constitution didn't stop him. He chose to step down after 2 terms because he believed in the principle of peaceful transfer of power, of not letting any one person become indispensable. That norm held for 150 years before we formalized it with the 22nd Amendment. Trump is testing whether these norms matter anymore, whether anything matters beyond raw power and political will. The electoral consequences bleed into 2026 and beyond too. Senate Republicans are watching this closely. There are 34 Senate seats up in 2026, and Republicans are defending 20 of them. Senators in purple states like North Carolina, Maine, Wisconsin, they're looking at these polls showing independents souring on Trump, and they're wondering whether tying themselves to him is politically smart. But they also know if they cross Trump, if they suggest he should be held accountable, the base will primary them. So they're paralyzed. They're waiting to see which way the wind blows. That's not leadership. That's not putting country first. That's pure political survival. And the Democrats? They're facing their own calculation. If Trump gets convicted before the election, do they make it the centerpiece of Biden's campaign? Do they run on "We Save Democracy"? Polling suggests voters care more about inflation and healthcare than January 6th, at least right now. But if there's dramatic courtroom testimony from a Trump cabinet member, if there are recordings or documents that make it undeniable what happened, that could change. It could make the threat feel real and immediate again, instead of like old news. A Georgetown University poll from January 11th showed that among voters who watched the January 6th committee hearings, 71% said Trump bore significant responsibility for the violence. Among those who didn't watch, it was only 38%. Testimony matters, evidence matters, it just has to break through the noise. Here's what keeps me up at night, and what should concern anyone who cares about the Republic regardless of party. We're in uncharted territory. We've never had a former president under criminal indictment for trying to overturn an election. We've never had a candidate for president running while potentially facing trial for conspiracy against the United States. We've never had to test whether our system can handle this. The founders didn't plan for this because they assumed shame still mattered, that someone who'd been caught trying to subvert the Constitution would withdraw from public life. They assumed political parties would act as filters, would refuse to nominate someone who'd crossed that line. Those assumptions are being tested right now. The next few weeks are crucial. The special counsel's office has indicated it wants to bring the January 6th case to trial before November 2024. That's an incredibly tight timeline with all the appeals and pretrial motions still pending. But if they're getting cooperation from insiders, if they're strengthening their case with direct testimony about Trump's intent and knowledge, they might pull it off. And if a jury in Washington, D.C. hears testimony from someone who sat in the Oval Office, who heard Trump's own words about staying in power, who saw the documents and the plans, that's a different calculus than just relying on public statements and reconstructed timelines. But even if the trial doesn't happen before the election, even if Trump wins and makes it all go away, this moment tells us something about where we are as a country. The fact that we're having this conversation, the fact that cabinet officials are cutting immunity deals to testify against a former president, the fact that federal judges are writing opinions calling presidential actions constitutionally indefensible. We're stress testing the system in real time, and we don't know yet if it's strong enough to hold. We don't know if accountability still means anything when it runs up against tribal politics and the cult of personality. The stakes have never been higher. This isn't about Trump versus Biden. This isn't about Republican versus Democrat. This is about whether we're still a nation of laws or whether we've decided that power is all that matters. That's the question this cabinet official's testimony is going to force us to answer. And the answer we give is going to shape American democracy for generations to come. The walls are closing in, the pressure is building, and someone on the inside just decided they couldn't stay silent anymore. Where this goes from here, that's up to the courts, the voters, and whether we still believe that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law. The next chapter is being written right now, and it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be pretty, but it matters. God, does it matter?